On the distant planet of Veyrath, the people were known for their strength and fierce nature. They were a race of warriors, their bodies built for battle, their minds trained for war. The very air they breathed seemed to carry the weight of ancient wars, battles that had shaped their existence. The Veyrathi, as they were called, were a proud people. Their society built around honor, strength, and survival. Only the strong survived, and the weak were quickly cast aside. Among these warriors was Kalia, a young girl born into a tribe called the Zorvax. From the moment she was born, it was clear that Kalia was different. While the other children grew, quickly, developing muscles and agility that made them the envy of their peers, Kalia struggled. She was small, fragile, and frail. Her arms and legs were thin, and her body lacked the natural strength of her people. The elders saw her weakness as a mark of shame, a stain on their tribe's reputation. They whispered among themselves that Kalia was a disgrace, not fit to be a Zorvak. As Kalia grew older, her differences became more apparent. She couldn't lift the heavy stones that other children could. She couldn't run as fast or fight as well. While her peers excelled in combat training, Kalia's attempts were clumsy and ineffective. She found herself constantly falling behind, her body not keeping up with the demands of her society. The other children mocked her, calling her weak and useless. Even her own family, though they loved her, could not hide the disappointment in their eyes. One day, during the tribe's annual strength trials, Kalia was forced to participate. The trials were a crucial event, where the warriors proved their worth in front of the entire tribe. It was a celebration of strength, endurance, and skill. For weeks, the children had been preparing, training day and night to show off their abilities. But Kalia had nothing to show. She wasn't ready, and she knew it. The day of the trials arrived, and Kalia stood nervously at the edge of the arena. The air was thick with tension as the Zorvax gathered to watch their young warriors compete. Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched her peers perform feats of strength. One after another, they lifted heavy weights, defeated opponents in mock combat, and displayed skills that seemed impossible for anyone to achieve. Kalia stood frozen, her hands shaking at her sides. When it was her turn, Kalia stepped forward, her legs feeling like jelly. The trial she was meant to face was a test of speed and agility. She was supposed to run through an obstacle course that involved dodging traps, climbing walls, and outrunning dangerous creatures. The other children had raced through this course effortlessly, but Kalia knew she would not be able to keep up. As the horn blew, signaling the start of the trial, Kalia moved as fast as her weak body would allow. She stumbled over rocks, collided with the walls, and barely managed to dodge the creatures that lunged at her. Every step she took felt like a struggle, and the audience could see her faltering. The final obstacle was a giant stone wall, one that all the other children had scaled with ease. Kalia reached the wall, but her arms were too weak to lift her. She tried again and again, but each attempt failed. Her body trembled with exhaustion, and her heart sank. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Kalia could hear the mocking laughter of her peers. She couldn't do it. She was failing, and everyone was watching. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chief elder, Torvak, called out to stop the trial. His voice was cold and harsh. "Enough," he said. "It is clear that Kalia is not fit for this tribe. She is weak, and her weakness endangers the tribe's future. She is no warrior." Kalia stood frozen, the shame of her failure washing over her like a wave. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. The tribe's warriors, who had once been her family, turned their backs on her. The Zorvax were a people who valued strength above all else, and Kalia's failure was seen as a direct insult to their way of life. The chief elder continued, his voice filled with disdain. "Kalia, you have been cast out. You will no longer be part of this tribe. Leave and do not return. We have no use for someone like you." The words struck Kalia like a physical blow. She had known that her weakness made her different, But hearing those words, being cast aside by her own people, was a pain she could hardly comprehend. She looked around at the faces of the warriors, her former friends and family. They all turned away from her, leaving her alone in the center of the arena. With a heavy heart, Kalia turned and walked away. The cold wind of the Veyrath wilderness greeted her as she left the tribe behind. She had no idea where she was going or what would happen next. All she knew was that she had been abandoned by everyone she had ever known. The tears in her eyes froze in the harsh wind as she walked deeper into the wilderness, unsure of her future. As the sun set behind the mountains, Kalia stumbled through the dense forest, feeling lost and small. She was weak. She had been told that her entire life. But deep inside, a spark of determination began to grow. She wasn't sure how, but she knew that she wasn't going to give up. Somehow, she would find a way to survive. Somehow, she would prove them all wrong. Kalia had walked for hours, the wilderness of Veyrath stretching endlessly before her. The ground beneath her feet was rough and uneven, covered in jagged rocks and thorny bushes. She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders with every step. Her body, once weak and fragile, now ached from the journey. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't even know if she could survive out here alone. The cold wind of the evening bit at her skin, and the silence of the forest seemed to mock her every move. She had been cast out. Her people, the Zorvax, had decided that she wasn't strong enough to be one of them. She had failed their trials, and now she was nothing. But deep inside, there was still a spark of hope. Kalia refused to believe that her life was over. She had been told she was weak, but she couldn't accept that. She knew there was more to her than what the tribe had seen. She just needed to find it. As the night approached, Kalia grew more desperate. She hadn't found food or water all day. Her throat was dry and her stomach growled with hunger. She could feel the exhaustion settling into her bones. But just as she thought she might collapse from fatigue, something unusual caught her attention. A strange light appeared in the distance, flickering like a star in the dark sky. At first, Kalia thought it might be a reflection from one of the moons of Veyrath. But as she moved closer, she realized it was coming from a small clearing in the forest. Curiosity stirred within her, and despite her fear, she decided to approach. The sound of her footsteps was muffled by the thick grass beneath her feet, and she crept forward as quietly as she could. When she reached the clearing, she stopped, her eyes wide with surprise. Standing in the center of the clearing was a figure unlike any she had ever seen before. It was a man, but he was not like the warriors of her tribe. His skin was pale and his clothing was strange, nothing like the leather and fur garments of the Zorvax. He wore a suit of metal, sleek and shining in the pale moonlight, and he held something in his hands that glowed with a strange light. Kalia's heart raced as she stepped back, unsure of what to make of this strange being. Was he a hunter? A traveler? Or perhaps another outcast like her? She hadn't seen anyone from another species in her entire life. The people of Veyrath had always kept to themselves, and outsiders were rare if they existed at all. The man seemed to sense her presence. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, Kalia felt a rush of fear. She had no idea who this stranger was or what he might want. But instead of showing hostility, the man simply smiled, a calm and reassuring expression. On his face, he took a step toward her, his movements fluid and graceful despite the heavy armor he wore. "You don't have to be afraid," he said in a language Kalia didn't recognize. His voice was soft but firm, and there was an understanding in his tone that immediately put her at ease. Kalia blinked in confusion. She didn't know what he was saying, but somehow she felt like he wasn't a threat. She hesitated for a moment, still unsure whether to trust him. She had been abandoned by her people, cast out without a second thought. Could this stranger really mean her no harm? The man seemed to sense her doubts. "I know you're lost," he continued, his voice kind. "I can help you." Kalia felt a strange tug at her heart. Could this really be true? Could someone, anyone, actually want to help her? She had been so alone for so long, it was hard to believe, but there was something in the man's eyes that made her want to trust him. "I'm Marcus," he said, introducing himself. "And you are?" Kalia stared at him for a moment before replying, her voice barely a whisper. "Kalia." He nodded, as though he understood something deeper than just her name. "Kalia," he repeated thoughtfully. "You're far from home, aren't you?" Kalia nodded, her throat tightening with emotion. She hadn't thought about it much before, but now, standing in the presence of this stranger, it hit her all at once. She had no home, no tribe. She was nothing. "I was cast out," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I'm weak. I couldn't pass the trials. My people don't want me." Marcus's expression softened. "I see," he said, his tone understanding but not pitying. "It doesn't have to be that way. You're not weak, Kalia. I can see that in you." Kalia blinked, unsure of what he meant. "But I am weak," she said, almost angrily. "I couldn't do what they expected. I failed." "You didn't fail," Marcus replied calmly. "You just haven't found your true strength yet. But I can help you." Kalia frowned, confused. "How? How could you possibly help someone like me?" Marcus stepped closer, his gaze steady and reassuring. "Because where you see weakness, I see potential. I see a fire in you. You may not know it yet, but you're capable of far more than you realize." Kalia looked at him in silence, her mind racing. How could this man, a complete stranger, understand her so well? How could he see something in her that even she didn't know was there? She had been told all her life that she was weak, that she was nothing. Could it really be true that she was capable of something more? Marcus's eyes softened as he spoke again. "You don't have to be alone. You don't have to live in the shadows of your people's expectations. You can be stronger than they ever imagined." For the first time in a long while, Kalia felt a spark of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but maybe, just maybe, this stranger was right. Maybe she wasn't as weak as she had been told. Maybe there was still a chance for her to prove that she could be more. "I will help you, Kalia," Marcus said, his voice firm with conviction. "Together, we'll make you stronger." Kalia looked at him, her heart beating faster. For the first time in a long time, she believed him. And with that, Kalia's journey toward something greater began. The days following Marcus's offer of help were filled with challenges and new beginnings for Kalia. The first thing Marcus did was teach her about the basics of survival in the wilderness. They were far from the safety of her tribe now, in an untamed land where every step could lead to danger. But Marcus was experienced. He had traveled across many worlds, seen many strange and dangerous places, and survived through his knowledge and resourcefulness. "Survival isn't just about strength," Marcus told Kalia one morning as they sat by a small campfire. "It's about understanding your environment, knowing when to fight and when to run, and, most importantly, knowing yourself." Kalia listened closely, soaking in every word. She had spent her life being told that strength was the key to survival. But here was a human, someone from a completely different world, teaching her that there was more to life than just physical power. Their training began early each day, starting with simple exercises designed to test Kalia's endurance and mental toughness. At first, Kalia struggled. Her body was not built for hard training, and the exercises pushed her to her limits. She was sore, exhausted, and frustrated. At times, she wanted to give up. But Marcus was always there, offering encouragement, pushing her to keep going, telling her that it was okay to feel tired but she could never stop. Not until she had given it everything she had. One of the first exercises was running, something that had always been difficult for Kalia. Her legs were short and her muscles weak compared to others. Marcus had her run through a dense forest trail, dodging trees and leaping over rocks. She tripped often, stumbling over uneven ground, but each time she fell, she got back up. Marcus didn't let her stop. "You're doing well, Kalia," he would say, his voice calm but firm. "You're stronger than you think." But running wasn't the only thing Kalia struggled with. Learning to control her fear was another challenge. Veyrath was a planet filled with dangerous creatures, many of which were capable of killing a person in seconds. Some were predators with razor-sharp claws, others were stealthy, waiting to ambush their prey. As part of her training, Marcus taught Kalia how to sense danger, how to read the signs of the land, and how to use her surroundings to stay safe. One day, as they walked through a dense forest, Marcus suddenly stopped. He raised his hand, signaling Kalia to be silent. She froze, her heart racing. She had learned to trust Marcus's instincts by now, and when he was quiet, so was she. They stood still, listening carefully to the sounds around them. After a few moments, Marcus whispered, "Do you hear it?" Kalia strained her ears. The forest was alive with noise, the rustling of leaves, the calls of distant creatures. But then she heard it, a low growl coming from behind a large tree. Her pulse quickened and fear started to rise in her chest. What was it? How big was it? She looked to Marcus for guidance, but he simply nodded, encouraging her to trust herself. "That sound," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the warning growl of a predator. It's waiting, watching. But we don't need to fight it. We need to move quietly and leave, slowly." Kalia's heart was pounding and her every instinct told her to run. But Marcus's calm presence grounded her. She took a deep breath, focused, and did exactly what he said. Slowly, they began to move away, keeping their steps light and quiet. Every muscle in Kalia's body tensed as she feared that the creature might strike, but Marcus was patient and deliberate, guiding her through the process. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a safe distance, and Marcus allowed them to stop. "You did well," he said, his voice steady. "You didn't let fear control you. That's what makes a true warrior." The words hit Kalia harder than she expected. A true warrior? She wasn't a warrior, not yet, at least. But something in her stirred. Maybe there was a warrior inside. Her, after all. She could feel it, deep within, a strength she had never known existed. In the following weeks, Marcus's lessons grew more intense. He taught Kalia how to fight, not with brute force, but with strategy and precision. The lessons were grueling, especially for someone like Kalia, who had spent her life avoiding combat. But with each lesson, she grew stronger. She learned how to use her agility, her ability to think quickly, and how to move in a way that outsmarted her opponent. One afternoon, they sparred for the first time. Marcus was careful, not wanting to hurt her, but still, Kalia was nervous. She had seen the other Zorvak warriors spar with each other, their fights fierce and fast. She wasn't sure if she could keep up, but Marcus was a patient teacher. He showed her the basics of defense, how to block and avoid strikes, and how to counterattack when the time was right. It wasn't about raw power, it was about being in control. At first, Kalia's movements were awkward, clumsy even. She stumbled, over her own feet, unsure of herself. But Marcus never scolded her. He simply corrected her gently, always encouraging, always guiding. "Remember," he said during one of their lessons, "strength comes from within. You don't need to overpower your opponent. You need to outsmart them." By the end of their first sparring session, Kalia had learned something important. She didn't need to be like the warriors of her tribe, powerful and aggressive. She needed to be her own kind of warrior, using her mind as much as her body. Marcus's way of training wasn't about brute strength. It was about building her confidence, her will, and her intelligence. It was about teaching her to rely on herself, no matter the challenge. And with each passing day, Kalia felt herself growing stronger. She was no longer the frail girl who had been cast out. She was becoming something more. Slowly but surely, Kalia was learning to believe in herself, to trust her instincts, and to understand that strength came in many forms. As she looked at Marcus, watching him demonstrate another technique, Kalia realized that she wasn't just training to survive anymore. She was training to be something greater, something her people had never believed she could be: a warrior. As the days turned into weeks, Kalia's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. The once weak girl who had been cast out by her tribe was slowly becoming someone stronger, more confident and resilient. She still felt the sting of the Zorvak's rejection, but it no longer defined her. The lessons Marcus taught her were more than just about physical strength. They were about reclaiming her sense of self. Each day, she saw herself in a new light. One morning, as Kalia and Marcus sat by the campfire, Kalia noticed something. She no longer felt the same fear she had once carried with her: the fear of failure, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being abandoned. These feelings had slowly faded. In their place was a growing sense of pride. She had pushed herself beyond what she thought was possible, and with each new lesson, she became more and more certain of her own worth. Marcus noticed the change, too. He saw the strength in her eyes, the confidence in her posture. She had come so far since that first day they met, and now, she was no longer the frightened, helpless girl who had wandered into the forest. She was a warrior in the making. "You're different," Marcus said one evening as they watched the sunset. "I can see it in you. You've grown stronger, Kalia. Stronger than you realize." Kalia smiled faintly, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and determination. She had spent so much of her life being told that she wasn't enough. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was. "I feel different," Kalia said quietly. I don't know, strong. But I don't think I'm finished yet. There's still something I'm missing." Marcus nodded, understanding. Strength doesn't come overnight. It's a process. But you've already started the journey, and I believe you're closer than you think. Kalia's mind wandered back to her tribe, the Zorvaks. She thought about her former friends, the warriors who had once been her family. It was hard to forget the looks of disappointment and disdain they had given her when they cast her out. But as time went on, she realized something. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need to be like them. She was creating her own path, one that didn't rely on their expectations. It wasn't long before Kalia's training became even more intense. Marcus pushed her harder now, testing her limits, seeing just how far she could go. The physical challenges were demanding, but it was the mental challenges that made her grow the most. She learned how to stay calm under pressure, how to think several steps ahead, and how to face the unknown with confidence. Her ability to adapt, to stay focused even when things seemed impossible, began to shine. One afternoon, as they trained in a small clearing, Marcus decided it was time for Kalia to face a real test. He told her that they would be sparring. This time for real. No more gentle training, no more holding back. Kalia was ready. The thought made Kalia nervous, but she didn't show it. She had sparred with Marcus many times before, but this was different. This was going to be a test of everything she had learned. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that this was her moment. As they stood facing each other, Marcus raised his hands in a fighting stance. "Are you ready, Kalia?" She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, but her mind was clear. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She wasn't going to let her past hold her back. This was her chance to prove that she had become something more. The fight began quickly. Marcus moved with speed and precision, his attack swift and calculated. Kalia blocked, dodged, and countered, remembering the techniques Marcus had taught her. It was harder than she expected. Marcus was experienced, and his moves were fluid and confident. But Kalia had changed. She wasn't the same girl she had been when they first met. She was faster, stronger, and more focused. For the first time, Kalia felt like she was in control. She wasn't just reacting. She was anticipating Marcus's moves, thinking ahead, using her surroundings to her advantage. She moved with purpose, her body and mind working together in harmony. She wasn't just fighting. She was thinking, adapting, and growing stronger with every move. The fight lasted longer than Kalia had expected. They were both tired, sweat dripping down their faces, but neither of them gave up. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Kalia saw an opening. Marcus made a slight misstep, and in that moment, Kalia seized the opportunity. With a quick, fluid motion, she knocked his arm aside and landed a soft strike to his side. Sheen. Fight ended. Marcus stepped back, breathing heavily. He was smiling, a look of pride on his face. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You won." Kalia stood there, panting and shocked. She had actually beaten him, not through brute force, but with strategy, skill, and the confidence that Marcus had helped her find. She had faced her fears and overcome them. For the first time in her life, Kalia felt like a warrior. "You've come a long way, Kalia," Marcus said, his voice steady. "You're not the girl you were when we first met. You're a warrior now, and you're ready." Kalia looked at him, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. She had done it. She had proven to herself that she was strong, not because of her muscles or her abilities, but because of the determination and resilience that had always been inside her. She had found her true strength. That night, as they sat by the fire, Kalia reflected on how far she had come. She had been cast out by her people, abandoned and alone, but now she was something else. She was a warrior, and she had done it all. On her own, with Marcus's help, of course, but it was her strength that had carried her. Kalia smiled as the flames crackled in the fire. She wasn't done yet. There was still more to learn, more to become. But she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer weak, she was powerful, and nothing could take that away from her. The days after Kalia's victory in the sparring match with Marcus were filled with a new sense of purpose. She had proven to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever believed, and now, more than ever, she was determined to keep growing. But the journey ahead would not be easy. Though she had gained strength and confidence, her past still lingered. Her tribe, the Zorvax, had not forgotten her. And Kalia knew that sooner or later she would have to face but this time, Kalia didn't feel the same fear that had once gripped her. She felt something different. Determination. She was no longer seeking approval from the Zorvax. She had found her own strength, her own path. This time she was walking back to face them as an equal, not as someone seeking validation. As Kalia and Marcus approached the village, they were met by a group of warriors, including the tribe's leader, Torvak. His eyes narrowed when he saw her, but there was no immediate judgment in his gaze. Kalia could see the confusion and curiosity in his eyes as he studied her. She was no longer the weak girl who had been cast aside. Kalia felt a surge of determination. She wasn't here to ask for forgiveness, and she wasn't here to beg for a place among the Zorvax. She had already proven her worth to herself. But if the Zorvax needed proof, then she would give it to them. She had nothing to lose. "I will prove it," Kalia said firmly. "Not with words, but with actions. I challenge you, Torvak. If I defeat you, then I will show you that I am worthy, not just to be a part of this tribe, but to lead it." The silence that followed was thick with tension. The warriors looked between Kalia and Torvak, waiting for the chief to respond. For a long time, there was no movement, no sound, but finally Torvak nodded. "Very well, Kalia," he said, his voice low and steady. "If you truly believe you are strong enough to lead, then we shall see if your actions match your words." Kalia's heart pounded in her chest, but there was no fear in her, only resolve. She had come here to prove herself, and now she had the chance. She had trained for this moment, and she was ready. As Kalia and Torvak prepared to face off, the tribe watched in silence. This was no longer just about Kalia's personal journey. It was about showing the Zorvaks that strength wasn't just about being born powerful. It was about what you chose to become. And Kalia had chosen to become more than anyone had ever expected. The air was thick with tension as the Zorvak warriors gathered around, forming a circle around Kalia and Torvak. The challenge had been accepted, and now the entire tribe watched in silence, eager to see the outcome. To them, this was more than just a fight. It was a test of Kalia's worth, a trial that would decide whether she could truly become one of them, or if she would once again be cast aside. Kalia stood across from Torvak, her heart pounding in. Her chest, but her mind was clear. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everything she had learned and for all the strength she had built during her time with Marcus. She wasn't the weak girl who had been abandoned. She was strong, capable, and ready to show it. Torvak, the chief of the Zorvaks, was a giant of a warrior. His muscles were like thick cords of steel, his eyes cold and calculating. He was everything that Kalia had been told she should be, powerful, fierce, and imposing. But now, Kalia saw him differently. He wasn't invincible. He was just another warrior, and she had learned more than enough to face him. "Are you ready, Kalia?" Torvak's voice was deep, his tone mocking. "Let's see if your training has truly made you strong." Kalia nodded, her posture steady and firm. "I'm ready." The moment the words left her mouth, Torvak charged forward, his massive body moving with surprising speed. Kalia's instincts kicked in, and she sidestepped just in time, narrowly avoiding his heavy strike. The force of his swing cut through. The air and the ground beneath them shook as his fist slammed into the dirt. He was fast, but Kalia was faster. She had learned not to rely solely on strength. She had learned to use her mind, her agility, and her surroundings. Kalia darted to the side, using her smaller size to her advantage. She had trained for months with Marcus, learning how to outsmart and outmaneuver opponents, no matter how large or powerful they might be. She wasn't going to beat Torvak by brute force alone. She needed to be smarter, more strategic. Torvak turned quickly, his eyes narrowing in frustration. "You're faster than I expected, Kalia, but that won't be enough." He lunged again, this time with a series of quick, powerful strikes. Kalia blocked and dodged, moving fluidly around him, keeping herself just out of reach. Each time he swung, she anticipated the attack, finding small openings where she could counterattack. It wasn't easy. Torvak's strength was overwhelming, and his every move seemed to carry the weight of 100 battles. But Kalia had learned to read the patterns of combat, and she used that knowledge to stay one step ahead. For every blow the Torvak struck, Kalia was there to deflect it or avoid it. She was no longer the scared girl who had been cast aside. She was a warrior who knew how to fight with purpose. Her breath was steady, her movements precise. She knew she couldn't make a mistake. Not here, not now. The tribe was watching, waiting to see if she could truly lead them. Minutes passed, and the battle raged on. Kalia's arms were beginning to feel heavy, her body aching from the constant movement. But she didn't slow down. She had come too far to give up now. She focused on her breathing, finding the rhythm of the fight, and then she saw it. A brief opening. Torvak's guard had slipped for Jew. Saint a moment. With the speed and precision she had practiced so many times before, Kalia struck. She moved in quickly, dodging under Torvak's wide swing and delivering a swift blow to his side. The impact made him stagger, and for a split second, he faltered. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In that moment of hesitation, Kalia saw her chance. She pressed forward using her newfound strength and agility to her advantage. She ducked under his next attack, then leaped onto his back, wrapping her arms around his neck in a move that surprised even herself. Torvak growled in frustration, trying to shake her off, but Kalia held on, her grip tight and unyielding. "Give up, Torvak," Kalia said through gritted teeth. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to be the leader just because you're strong. I've learned that strength is more than power. It's knowing when to fight and when to stop." Torvak struggled beneath her, but Kalia refused to let go. She had faced her fears, overcome her doubts, and now she was ready to take her place, not just as a warrior, but as a leader. With one final, powerful effort, Torvak fell to his knees, exhausted. Kalia held him there, her breath heavy, but her heart full of resolve. She had done it. She had won, not by overpowering him, but by outsmarting him, by using everything she had learned. The tribe watched in stunned silence. For a moment, it seemed as if the world had stopped. Then, slowly, one by one, the warriors began to clap. It started as a quiet murmur, but soon the entire tribe was cheering. Kalia had done the impossible. She had defeated Torvak, not with sheer force, but with the strength of her mind and spirit. Torvak, still kneeling on the ground, looked up at Kalia, his face filled with disbelief and, finally, respect. "You've proven yourself, Kalia," he said, his voice low. "You are stronger than I ever realized. You have the heart of a true warrior." Kalia helped him to his feet, her eyes steady. "I didn't want to defeat you, Torvak. I wanted to show the tribe that strength isn't just about power. It's about using your mind, your heart, and your will. We all have the potential to be great." Torvak nodded, a grudging respect in his eyes. "You're right," he said, standing tall. "The tribe will follow you. You've earned it." As Kalia looked around at the warriors, she felt a sense of pride unlike anything she had ever known. This wasn't just about defeating Torvak. This was about changing the way her people saw strength. She had shown them that leadership came from within, that it wasn't about physical power, but about wisdom, determination, and the courage to do what was right. The tribe had accepted her, and in that moment, Kalia knew her journey was just beginning. She had faced her past, defeated her doubts, and proved that she was more than what anyone had ever thought she could be. The future of the Zorvaks lay in her hands, and she was ready to lead them into a new era. The days after Kalia's victory were filled with change. The Zorvak tribe, once proud of their strength and power, now looked at their new leader with a different kind of respect. They had seen her rise from weakness to strength, from rejection to acceptance. Kalia's victory over Torvak had not only proven her skill in combat, but it had shown the entire tribe something they had never considered before. True strength came from within. Kalia had always known she wasn't like the other Zorvaks. They had prided themselves on their physical prowess, their ability to overpower anyone who stood in their way. But Kalia had learned that strength wasn't just about muscle. It was about heart, intelligence, and the ability to persevere in the face of challenges. Her time with Marcus had shown her that leadership wasn't about dominating others, but about guiding them, about using what made her unique to inspire those around her. As she stood before the Zorvak warriors, Kalia felt a new sense of responsibility, weighing on her shoulders. She had earned their respect, but now she had to prove she could lead them in a way that was different from what they had known. The tribe had always been focused on battle and strength, but Kalia knew that to truly succeed, they needed more. They needed to change the way they viewed strength, and she was the one who could show them how. The first change Kalia made was subtle but important. She encouraged the warriors to train not just in physical combat, but also in strategy and problem-solving. She made sure that each warrior understood that their mind was just as important as their body, She spent hours teaching them how to think before acting, how to read their surroundings, and how to outsmart an enemy rather than simply overpowering them. Some of the older warriors were skeptical at first, but as they saw the results of their training, they began to realize that Kalia's approach was working. One day, during a training session, Kalia gathered the warriors together. "We are not just fighters," she said, her voice steady and confident. "We are leaders. We will not only protect our land, we will build alliances, create stronger bonds with others, and show them that the Zorvax are not just powerful, but wise and compassionate as well." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Kalia could see the hesitation in the eyes of some of the warriors. But there was also a spark of curiosity. They had never heard a leader speak like this before. They had always been taught to fight first, think second. But Kalia was showing them a new path, one where strength came from understanding, from working together, and from building a better future. Kalia's leadership was not just about changing how the Zorvax trained. It was about changing how they viewed themselves. She encouraged them to embrace their differences, to use their individual skills to complement each other, rather than seeing anyone as weak or unworthy. Under her guidance, the tribe began to grow stronger in ways they had never imagined. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Kalia stood by the edge of the village looking out over the land. It had been a long and difficult journey to get here, but as she watched the Zorvax train together, working side by side, she felt a sense of pride. This wasn't just a tribe of warriors, it was a community, one that valued not only strength, but also wisdom, compassion, and unity. Her thoughts were interrupted by Marcus, who had joined her on the edge of the village. He smiled at her, his eyes filled with pride. "You've done it, Kalia. You've turned this tribe into something truly remarkable." Kalia turned to him, a smile tugging at her lips. "We've done it, Marcus. I couldn't have done this without you. You taught me that strength is not just about fighting. It's about knowing when to fight and when to lead. I've learned that, and now the tribe is learning it too." Marcus nodded, his gaze softening. "You were always capable of this, Kalia. I just helped you see it. You believed in yourself when no one else did, and now, look at what you've built. The Zorvax are stronger than they've ever been, not just in battle, but in heart and mind." Kalia smiled at him, grateful for everything he had done for her. "I still have a lot to learn," she said, her voice thoughtful. "But I've learned one thing for sure. Strength comes from within, and as long as we remember that, we can face any challenge." Marcus chuckled. "You've come a long way from the girl who was cast out. You're a true leader now, Kalia." Kalia looked out over the village, her heart swelling with pride. She had faced her fears, overcome her doubts, and proven that she was more than the Zorvax had ever believed. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a leader, someone who had the power to change her people's future, and the future was bright. But Kalia knew that her journey wasn't over. There were still many challenges ahead. There were still many warriors who would need to be convinced of the strength of her vision. There were still lands to be explored, alliances to be made, and enemies to be faced. But Kalia was ready. She had faced the darkness of her past, and now she stood in the light of her future, strong and confident, ready to lead her people into a new era. "Together," she whispered to herself, "we'll create a new legacy." As the night fell and the stars began to twinkle above, Kalia knew that her journey was just beginning. The Zorvax had found a new leader, but more importantly, they had found a new way of life. And that life would be built on the foundation of strength, wisdom, and unity. The legacy of the Zorvax was no longer one of destruction and fear. It was one of hope, of change, and of the belief that anyone, no matter how weak they seemed, could become the strongest warrior. Kalia had proven that, and now she would lead her people to a future where anything was possible.